Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. Today we're diving into another tragic case that blends love and hatred. Sometimes these two emotions are so closely connected that they can lead to devastating consequences. In the darkest parts of the human soul, where jealousy and anger mix, dangerous thoughts can emerge that destroy everything in their path. That's exactly what happened in a story that rocked the small town of Milford, leaving a lasting impact. One morning, as the sun started to break through the fog, the body of a young woman, once full of life and dreams, was found in her home. But this wasn't just any murder, it was brutal and ruthless. Her face showed signs of violence, and there was an eerie silence, as if death itself still lingered, witnessing the horror detectives were about to uncover. Behind every piece of evidence was a shadow of a man willing to do anything to satisfy his violent urges. But who was he? Was it an ex-lover, whose obsession turned dangerous, or someone hiding in an even darker place? The evidence pointed in different directions, confusing the investigators and leaving them unsure of the truth. Everyone connected to this tragedy had a dark side, and each carried a secret. But one thing was clear: this crime had to be solved. Dark emotions had been set loose, turning life into a nightmare, and this nightmare was only just beginning. On August 24, 2012, Alexandra's ex-boyfriend, Matthew Pugh, was charged with first-degree murder and home invasion. At the time of these charges, Matthew was already in prison for assaulting a woman in 2008. He had threatened her with a gun, stolen her purse, and when she tried to fight back, he shot her in the arm. Investigators found out that Matthew's issues went back even further. When Alexandra told him while he was in prison that she wanted to end their relationship, Matthew became furious, according to his cellmates. Obsessed with Alexandra, he wrote her a threatening 8-page letter. Fearing for her life, Alexandra's mother reported this to the prison, and Matthew was banned from contacting her. As a result, his prison sentence was extended. Though Matthew was angry after his release, he didn't show any signs of aggression towards Alexandra. He even started a new relationship and became a father, but deep inside, he was still plotting revenge. However, as is often the case, justice takes time to be served. What led Matthew to face trial? In February 2015, 3 years after the crime, Matthew appeared in court. The prosecution claimed he was driven by jealousy and that the crime was carefully planned. His defense attorney argued for his innocence, pointing out the lack of direct evidence, such as DNA or fingerprints, at the scene. Matthew's situation took a sharp turn for the worse when he started answering the prosecution's questions. His attempts to prove his innocence seemed weak, especially after his own brother's testimony. The jury had a tough decision ahead, as the case was full of inconsistencies and unanswered questions. Many people thought Matthew was a habitual liar. In fact, his version of events had to be retold in court more than once. To understand why the justice system came down so hard on him, we need to go back to the early days of the investigation, when the police were just starting to untangle this complicated case. Some of Jason's past came to light as well. It turns out Jason also had a criminal record. He had served over 5 years for selling illegal drugs. He also drove a car similar to the one a neighbor had seen near Alexandra's house. Another witness reported seeing a dark green car parked there for almost the entire day. Despite this, Jason continued to claim his innocence, pointing out that this type of car was very common in the city. When detectives checked Jason's story about being at a clothing store to buy pants around 3 a.m., they found out it wasn't true. He had actually been there much later in the evening, which didn't match what he told them. It looked like he was lying to throw off the investigation. But when police checked his phone records and location data, they found that his cell phone hadn't been in the Milford area all day. With this, the police ruled him out as a suspect, turning their attention back to Matthew. Police then spoke with Sandra's mother to learn more about Matthew. She had never liked him, mainly because of the age difference. He was 7 years older than her daughter. On top of that, he had a criminal record and wasn't interested in bettering himself. Unlike Sandra, he didn't want to work, and she felt he was holding her back. Detectives also talked to Matthew's employer. They discovered that on the day of the murder, he had left work much earlier than he claimed. Instead of finishing at 9:15 a.m., he had clocked out at 8:39. After that, he was seen at a gas station, but not at noon as he had told police. He was actually there at 2:10 a.m. These discrepancies in his story were troubling. While he did visit the car dealerships until 4 p.m., the times he gave the police were all incorrect. Maybe he was just confused about the times, but investigators believe Matthew was hiding something. On May 26th, police obtained a search warrant for his home. Everything inside was neat and clean, with nothing out of place except for a roll of duct tape. Investigators suspected that the tape found on the victim's face might have come from this very roll. However, having duct tape in the house didn't prove Matthew's involvement in the crime. After all, many people own duct tape. All other tests and analyses couldn't link Matthew to the murder. Investigators searched through his belongings but found nothing. It seemed like the investigation had hit a dead end. The only action left was to send the duct tape to a lab for further analysis. It turned out that this type of duct tape was quite rare. It wasn't sold in regular stores or even online. In 2006, only 3 local companies used this specific type of tape, and one of them was an aircraft parts factory where Matthew's ex-boyfriend used to work. The adhesive backing on the duct tape found on the victim's face matched this exact type of tape. This could point to the real killer. Law enforcement decided to reach out to Matthew's family again, and they received some valuable information. According to his brother, Matthew had a violent and short-tempered personality. He also had a motive against his ex-girlfriend. The police learned that Matthew had given Sandra his Nissan car in 2002 and later lent her $2,000 in 2003. In January 2004, while he was in jail, Sandra decided to break up with him and never paid him back. This likely made Matthew furious. While police were still investigating his background, someone already had a feeling that something bad was coming. When questioned by the police, Jason mentioned that he had spoken with Alexandra around noon. According to Jason, they were calmly discussing their evening plans and had planned to have dinner together. Around 12:20 p.m. during their conversation, Alexandra suddenly asked him to hold on as she saw her ex-boyfriend outside the house. Jason said he heard the door open, and Alexandra asked, "What are you doing here?" There was no response, but the door shut and Alexandra returned to the call. However, she quickly told Jason she couldn't talk anymore and ended the conversation. Jason found this suspicious and even felt a little jealous. 15 minutes passed without a call back, and Jason grew worried. Luckily, she answered the phone at 12:35 p.m., and they spoke for a couple more minutes. Alexandra didn't bring up who had come to see her or why. Thanks to Jason's account, police were able to narrow down the time of Alexandra's death. It was now believed to have occurred between 12:37 p.m. and 4:30 p.m. According to Jason, during this time, he was at work, driving around the city and checking equipment. After 3:00 p.m., he went to a clothing store to buy pants for their planned date. Around 4:30 p.m., Jason called Alexandra again, but when he arrived at her house, he saw police cars parked outside. The police spoke with Alexandra's loved ones and learned that her only ex-boyfriend was Matthew, but they had broken up 2 years before these events. While waiting for a warrant to analyze phone records, detectives talked to Alexandra's relatives. It turned out that the breakup with Matthew hadn't gone smoothly. Alexandra's mother, Linda, knew that Matthew had a criminal record and had mistreated her daughter. Their relationship continued until Matthew went to prison for the first time in 1998. During that time, Alexandra still supported him and visited, but his prison sentence was long and serious. Even though Alexandra had loved him, doubts grew in their relationship. By January 2004, they officially broke up. One of the reasons was Matthew's increasingly rude and threatening behavior. They continued to talk, but Matthew's anger only grew, and getting back together wasn't an option. At the time of the investigation, Matthew was living with his wife about 30 minutes away from Alexandra's home. On the day the police arrived to question him, he was working at a Papa John's restaurant. The officers spoke with him for about 15 minutes. Matthew admitted he had 2 jobs, the second being at an aircraft parts company an hour north of Milford. He claimed that on the day of the murder, he worked his shift from 6:30 a.m. to 3:00 p.m., then went home. When informed that Alexandra was dead, he seemed confused. It appeared that Matthew, being a former convict, didn't trust the police. He admitted he had spoken to Alexandra on the phone a few days before her death, but said their last meeting was at least 4 weeks before the tragedy. After the interview, the detectives left, but this wasn't the end of their interactions with Matthew. The next day, Matthew showed up at the station and confessed that he had lied. He admitted he did arrive at work at 6:30 a.m., but left early, at 9:15 a.m., with permission from his supervisor. He said he spent most of the day at home, then went to town in the afternoon to help a sick relative. Matthew insisted he wasn't in Milford or even near the area that day. He agreed to DNA testing and gave the police the clothes he wore on the day of Alexandra's death. Even though Matthew confessed to lying, his alibi was confirmed. Still, both Matthew and Jason remained the primary suspects. However, to truly understand this complicated case, it's important to dig deeper into the lives of not only Matthew, but also Jason, Alexandra, and her boyfriends. Their complicated relationships and hidden motives might hold the key to unraveling the mystery of this tragedy. Now let's look at what was really happening in their lives and what could have led to such a terrible outcome. Alexandra Duxer was born on December 9, 1979, in New Haven, Connecticut. She was known to her family and friends as Sandra. Alexandra grew up in the scenic Milford neighborhood, just an hour's drive from New York City. Her parents, John and Linda, met in 1974 and married a few months later, forming a close-knit family. Alexandra had 2 older brothers with whom she always had a close and friendly relationship. Despite the age difference, Alexandra's brothers were always protective of their younger sister. They helped their parents by staying active, playing sports, and spending time together. The family lived in a large house, and the basement became Alexandra's personal space. She turned it into a cozy bedroom and gym, where she often invited friends over for sleepovers and hangouts. From a young age, Sandra loved dancing and gymnastics. In high school, she dreamed of becoming an actress, which matched her energetic and bright personality. Dancing was a huge part of her life. She participated in many contests and competitions, often winning awards. Sandra's life was full and busy. Along with dancing, she was a dedicated student, planning to earn a law degree. After high school, she went to college, took dance classes, and got a part-time job at a bank. During one of her outings, she met Matthew, her first love. They both shared a love for sports and ambition. Later, Sandra earned a bachelor's degree in finance and became a systems analyst at the same bank where she worked for several years. She spent almost 10 years dancing while also earning her real estate license. At 23, she became a teaching assistant at a dance academy. Her career grew quickly. Sandra often performed in New York City, participated in dance events, and even appeared in music videos. By the time she was 26, she started working with a producer in Atlanta, creating demo music videos for albums. Her dreams were slowly coming true. She found an agent in New York who helped her land small acting roles. Sandra got a part in a popular TV series, which was a big step for her. But with her busy career, Sandra had little time for her personal life. After dating Matthew for a few years, they decided to break up in January 2004. Alexandra chose to focus entirely on her work and dancing. Around this time, her family was also going through a tough period. Her parents decided to separate, and her father moved to Florida to be closer to his elderly mother. Sandra's brothers had moved out, started their own families, leaving her and her mother at home. Though much of the house was empty, Sandra continued living in the basement, where she had everything she needed for training, including a display of her many dance awards. She lived there with her large dog and kept busy with acting auditions. Sandra also became active in charity work. She organized drives to collect clothes and toys for children from low-income families. She even planned to help start a free meal program for those in need. But everything changed on May 19, 2006. On that day, Sandra met her best friend Nicole at the gym. They worked out together from 10:15 to 11:15 a.m. After Nicole left, Sandra decided to stay a bit longer for more exercise. She planned to go home afterward, have lunch, clean up, and get ready for her evening plans. Nicole tried to call Alexandra around 4 p.m., but her call went straight to voicemail. This was unusual, as Sandra always made sure to stay available because of her busy schedule. Nicole had never experienced a time when Alexandra didn't call back. Around 4:30 p.m., Sandra's mother, Linda, arrived at the house. Right away, she noticed something strange. The front door was wide open, and Sandra's dog was sitting on the patio, wagging its tail. Sandra's white Mitsubishi was parked in the driveway. This was odd because the front door was always kept shut, and the dog never went outside without its collar and leash. Panic hit Linda as she rushed into the house, calling for her daughter, but there was no answer. Her anxiety grew with every step. As she walked toward the basement, she noticed large drops of blood on the floor. Moving further, she saw a bigger blood stain. Then she saw something that froze her in place. Sandra's legs were in front of her, motionless. Sandra was lying on her back in a pool of blood, completely still. Sandra had suffered a severe head injury and was lying under a table in a twisted, unnatural position. At first, Linda thought her daughter might have fallen down the stairs and hit her head on the radiator, which also had blood on it. In disbelief, Linda rushed to check for a pulse, but there was none. In a state of shock, Linda called 911, screaming and crying into the phone as she tried to explain the terrible scene. The dispatcher had difficulty understanding her through the tears and confusion. Eventually, they realized Linda had found her daughter dead in the basement. When police arrived, they were faced with a horrific scene. Blood covered the basement floor, walls, and furniture. Even Sandra's trophy display with 12 awards was splattered with blood. Sandra's face was brutally injured, her head crushed so badly that one of her eyes was missing. A broken knife blade was lodged in her skull, with the handle lying nearby. Sandra had been stabbed so violently that the knife broke during the attack, leaving part of it inside her. Her injuries were devastating. Linda also noticed that one of Sandra's trophies was missing and assumed it had been used in the attack. The police quickly understood that Sandra was a victim of violent murder, with injuries too severe for her to survive. In addition to the brutal injuries and the murder weapon, detectives found a distinct shoe print in the basement, smeared with blood. However, it wasn't a regular sole. The shoe print appeared to lack a tread pattern. Blood was also found in other parts of the house, including the bathroom, where traces were spotted on the toilet seat and sink, likely left by the attacker while trying to wash their hands. Investigators noticed attempts to clean up some of the blood, suggesting the killer had tried to cover their tracks. The police suspected a personal motive behind the attack, especially with the missing trophy. The brutality of the blows led them to believe the perpetrator was likely someone close to Alexandra. Despite the violence, most of the furniture and belongings in the house remained untouched. However, clothes were pulled from the closet and scattered across the bed and floor. Jewelry and cash, items a robber would typically take, were left behind. It looked as though the perpetrator was searching for something specific. The police believed Alexandra was attacked when she went down to the basement, possibly pushed down the stairs. Her first injury occurred when she hit her head on the radiator. Evidence of a struggle showed she wasn't killed right away. The knife used in the attack was not from the house, as none of the kitchen knives were missing. Police gained access to Alexandra's cell phone and began investigating more than 100 contacts. They had to carefully examine each number for possible leads. During the investigation, one unusual detail stood out: the trash bag was pulled out of the garbage can. This suggested the attacker might have used it to hide evidence, possibly including bloodied clothes. By 5 p.m., Alexandra's brother and her friend Nicole arrived at the scene. Nicole was in shock as she had seen Sandra just a few hours earlier. The quiet neighborhood of Milford, where Alexandra lived, was shaken by the crime. Residents sought answers, but the police held back from making any statements until more information was available. The house was sealed off as investigators continued their work. Nicole mentioned that after their workout, Alexandra had planned to meet her new boyfriend, Jay, for dinner at a restaurant. Although she knew his first name, Nicole couldn't provide any other details. This mystery man became a focus for the investigators, who began canvassing the neighborhood and interviewing potential witnesses to gather more clues. Milford, known for its low crime rate, was stunned by the tragedy, as Alexandra Duxey's murder made national headlines. Alexandra had become a local celebrity thanks to her supporting roles on the popular TV series Law & Order, and her sudden death drew significant media attention. The police reached out to the public through the media, hoping to gather witnesses, which ignited a wave of interest from local journalists eager for any details they could find. As the investigation into Alexandra's murder unfolded, police received scattered reports from neighbors. One neighbor mentioned that around 12:30 a.m. on the day of the crime, they noticed a red pickup truck parked near Alexandra's home. The vehicle didn't belong to any of the local residents. Another witness, around 4 p.m., saw a dark-skinned man walking past the house, later getting into a dark green Honda Accord. Unfortunately, neither witness could recall the license plates or the precise location of the vehicles. While detectives worked to clarify these details, Alexandra's new boyfriend, Jason Malone, quickly attracted law enforcement's attention. Initial attempts to contact Jason were answered by his sister, who provided his details. When Jason finally arrived for questioning, he appeared visibly nervous, but he strongly insisted that he had nothing to do with Alexandra's death. Jason explained that he and Alexandra had started dating after a friend took him to the bank where she worked. Struck by her beauty, Jason asked his friend for Alexandra's phone number. Alexandra, charmed by his bold gesture, agreed to exchange contact details, and soon they started talking regularly, leading to their first date. At the time they met, Jason was a few years older than Alexandra. He had just moved out of his ex-girlfriend's house and was temporarily living with his mother. Jason described having personal struggles, particularly with his ex, and working as an electric meter checker for a local power company. Alexandra, cautious after her long 6-year relationship with her previous boyfriend, Matt Pooh, didn't rush into publicizing her new romance with Jason. She wanted to take her time and avoid jumping to conclusions about where things might lead. Her cautious approach seemed to hint at the looming unpredictability and tragedy. As investigators began to put the pieces of the puzzle together, their attention circled back to another key figure in the case, Matt Pooh. Despite mounting evidence and new suspicions about Jason, detectives decided to re-examine Matt. A major development occurred on June 14th when Matt was re-interviewed. Detectives highlighted inconsistencies in his earlier statements, but Matt was able to explain away the discrepancies, leaving law enforcement without enough solid evidence to press charges. However, a breakthrough came later in the year when DNA tests introduced new evidence into the case. The blood found in the basement belonged entirely to Alexandra, but the blood droplets in the bathroom told a different story. It was a mixture of Alexandra's blood and the blood of an unidentified man. Unfortunately, due to the low concentration, an accurate DNA profile couldn't be obtained at that time. Still, forensic experts were able to confirm that the unknown suspect was a dark-skinned male. This new lead reignited the investigation and shifted the focus back onto finding the mysterious figure whose presence at the crime scene could finally unravel the case. Despite these revelations, solving Alexandra Duxey's murder remained elusive. Both main suspects, Matt and Jay, shared similar traits, including the dark-skinned male description from the forensic DNA evidence. Additionally, hair found on Alexandra's body couldn't be identified, and none of the fingerprints matched the suspects. Even the specific shoe print remained undetermined, leading the investigation to another dead end. In a desperate attempt to move the case forward, law enforcement offered a $50,000 reward for any information that could help solve the crime. In 2010, authorities expanded their search by reaching out to prisoners, circulating Alexandra's photos in correctional institutions. By September 2011, the police received a tip from an inmate named Paula, who claimed that his former cellmate, Christopher Richards, had an affair with Alexandra 2 years before her death. Paula alleged that Christopher had threatened to kill Alexandra after learning about her breakup with Matt and before she began dating Jay. However, when detectives followed up, it turned out that Paula had lied. There was no relationship between Christopher and Alexandra, nor any correspondence or communication linking them. Disappointed yet again, the police dismissed the lead. Just 2 weeks later, another potential witness, a bus driver named Jeremy, resurfaced. Jeremy had been friends with Alexandra for years and recalled seeing her receive a threatening message from a man named Donovan, who demanded repayment of a debt, and threatened her life if she didn't comply. This message had allegedly been sent 2 weeks before Alexandra's death, but after an investigation, this claim too proved to be irrelevant to the case. Years passed without any breakthroughs until August 2012, when the case took a surprising turn. Anthony Pooh, Matt's cousin, approached the detectives with new information. Police had previously spoken with Anthony during their early investigation, but this time he revealed more about Matt's behavior following his breakup with Alexandra. According to Anthony, after Alexandra ended her relationship with Matt, he became obsessed with jealousy. Matt, furious over her new relationship with Jay, began contemplating ways to kill her. Initially, he devised a plan to inject Alexandra with a lethal dose of an illegal substance to make her death look like an accidental overdose. But when he learned more about her new romance, he shifted to a much more violent and direct method. Anthony recounted that in 2005 and 2006, he and Matt had worked at an aircraft factory. Matt had stolen gloves and special duct tape from the factory with the intention of using these tools to carry out his brutal plan. Despite Anthony's criminal background and history with his cousin, the police believed that Anthony was telling the truth this time. He had detailed knowledge about Matt's state of mind and the premeditated nature of his plans. Although Anthony had personal reasons for coming forward, partially driven by resentment towards Matt for past betrayals and a desire for the $50,000 reward, he also clarified that he sought justice for Alexandra. Anthony's information shed new light on the case, and investigators were hopeful that this long-awaited breakthrough could finally bring Matt to justice. In verifying Anthony Pooh's information, investigators uncovered crucial details that had previously slipped through their grasp. Records showed that at approximately 11:47 a.m. on the day of Alexandra's murder, Matt was indeed in cell phone coverage in Milford. He briefly left the area, returning at 12:07 p.m. and remaining there for over an hour. This timeline became pivotal for law enforcement, serving as key evidence that ultimately led to Matt's arrest and subsequent charges. As the investigation progressed, forensic experts began to reveal the horrific nature of Alexandra's death. She had sustained multiple stab and slash wounds, as well as blunt force injuries to her head, predominantly affecting her facial area. It was determined that her murder involved not just a knife but also a trophy that was missing from her home, suggesting a personal and violent confrontation. Tragically, she had been beaten so severely that she swallowed several of her knocked-out teeth before succumbing to her injuries. Among the evidence gathered, a significant discovery was made: a single hair found stuck to the dried blood on Alexandra's body, which did not belong to her. Additionally, forensic teams found remnants of duct tape on her face, indicating it had been used to muffle her during the brutal attack. In late August 2012, after years of painstaking investigation, Matthew Pugh was finally charged with first-degree murder and trespassing in Alexandra's home. Despite a vigorous defense, the complexity of the case worked against him, while the weight of the evidence continued to mount. When the jury began deliberating, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. No one anticipated the length of time it would take for them to reach a verdict. The jury faced the daunting task of sorting through the convoluted details of the case, which took 3 long days. Finally, after carefully considering all the evidence and testimonies, they reached their verdict. Matthew Pooh was found guilty of first-degree murder and trespassing. The court sentenced him to 60 years in prison for the murder, with an additional 20 years for the trespassing charge in Alexandra's home. This severe sentence brought a measure of closure to a tragic story that had remained shrouded in uncertainty and suspicion for far too long, allowing the community to begin healing from the profound loss of a young woman whose life had been filled with promise. Finally, once again, we extend our heartfelt thanks to all of our viewers who have accompanied us throughout this journey. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our latest episodes.